Here we are in the last lesson of our series on Python, focused on working with external libraries. This is going to be a really important lesson related to bringing in sets of functions and different libraries. I have already gotten this lesson into my own Kaggle notebook. I have cloned it into my profile so I can execute the different cells. What we're going to do today, like I said, we're going to talk about importing external libraries. So I'm not going to read through all of this text. You can get a sense of what a library is. In Python, there's just so many different directions you can go in. And data analytics is one of those directions. And there's really important libraries such as pandas. So in fact, the entire next section is just about the pandas library, which is a really important library. Here, we're just going to learn how to import libraries, going to learn what they mean, how you extract the different functions from those libraries, etc. So let's start out with this first line of code. There's a library called math. Math is a library that's called a standard library, which helps with basic mathematics functions and operators that aren't contained in the core set of functionality of Python itself. So let's take a look at what's inside. One thing that you can do to understand the inbuilt functions in this library called math is you can use the dir command, and dir will show you, basically you're printing all the math functions. So all of these are functions that you can use now that you've loaded this library. One of those functions, for example, is .py. And to call .py, you can use the notation, the name of the library, math, and then .py. So here we can see that used where you're basically printing a string, you're combining it with these curly brackets here to insert .py. You're bringing that down to 4 significant digits using this notation, and what you end up with is 3.142. If we come here, there's another function called .log or .log. Here you can see that when you input 2 numbers into this function, out comes a result. But maybe we don't know exactly what those 2 numbers mean. We can use help to look for the help file of this function. What we find out is that the 2 numbers that you're you're inputting in here are the number that you want to turn the logarithm of that number, and then a certain base, which if not specified, it's just using the natural logarithm or base e of x. And then, so if you go back up here, you'll notice that it's finding the logarithm of 32 with a base of 2. You can also find out the entire help of the entire module itself, or the entire library itself. Of course, this is going to be quite long. I keep scrolling here, and you're basically seeing all of the descriptors of all of the different functions in this library. And so this is just a way that you can understand what's inside there and what are the tools in this toolkit that you're bringing in when you load this library. Other syntax that you might want to understand is that you can make the names of the libraries abbreviated by importing them. And I forgot to mention that import is the key Python command that brings in the library. But if you append as and then a shorter version of the library name, it basically loads the library in the same way, but you can use the abbreviation to call the library. So here, import math as mt, so mt.py does the same thing as what we've seen above. And this is really common. A lot of people like to bring in really common libraries like NumPy or Pandas as NP or PD, just to make the code more concise. And it shows you what it's equivalent to. It's basically just creating another variable for that library name in the same way that if you did this. What you could also do is you could import all the functions at once instead of just one function at a time. Another way of doing that is from math, so from this library, import the names of certain functions. In this case, we put the star sign, which is telling Python that we want to import all of the functions. And when we do that, we don't need to call the name of the library. When we call the library, we don't need to call it. We can just call the name of the function because it's been brought into our kernel and like our space where we can work. We don't need to specify the name of the library. So here you can see that those 2 functions are brought in. Pi and log are brought in without math in front of them. So import brings everything into your workspace, makes it accessible. Bad news, sometimes Python purists, they don't like this, because what might happen is you're bringing in potentially multiple libraries. So here's where we bring in all of the library functions for math and all of the library functions from NumPy. What happens is that You're importing two libraries that both have modules called, and the function's called log. So what happens is that you basically bring in two functions of the same name, which is not good practice and causes an error. So a better way of doing it would be from math, you import log and pi, and from numpy, you bring in just the functions that you need if you want to bring it in using that notation. So another thing to keep in mind is that in certain libraries, there are submodules within a library. So for example, in the numpy library, there's a submodule called random, which is also in and of itself a module. This is a little bit more of the details of how libraries work, which is not super crucial for beginners to understand. So don't worry too much about this section. And it just shows that .random has another submodule called .randomInt. So you can chain these modules together. And this is something that you'll see in future sessions, but the details of how and why this works is not super crucial. At the end of this lesson is a few things related to libraries. Going to go into them. Don't worry about these because it goes into something called operator overloading, which is, I think, a more advanced topic that is not needed for everyone to understand here. So if you want to go through the rest of this lesson, go for it, but it's not crucial. The final thing is an exercise in coding, which you can take to learn more about external libraries. But once again, I don't recommend that you spend a ton of time learning about some of these more advanced topics at the end, which I think are a bit overkill for beginners. Good luck, and thanks for watching all the videos from these two subsections.